My name is Selena, and I'm 43 years old. I never thought my daughter's wedding day would turn into the most humiliating experience of my life. For as long as I can remember, it had always been just me and Harper. When her father left us, she was barely 3 years old, and I was a terrified young mother trying to figure out how to keep the lights on. I remember holding her in my arms that night, promising her that I'd never let her feel abandoned again. From that moment on, every decision I made revolved around her. I worked 2 jobs for years, cleaning houses in the mornings and waiting tables at night just so I could afford to send her to a decent school. There were nights I'd collapse on the couch, my feet swollen, my hands sore. But when Harper would crawl into my lap with her storybooks, every ache disappeared. She was my world. When Harper grew up and graduated college, I was the proudest mother alive. Seeing her walk across that stage in her cap and gown felt like I was crossing it with her. She had blossomed into a beautiful, intelligent young woman, strong, driven, and kind. When she called one night to tell me she'd met someone special, her voice carried that same teenage excitement she used to have when she got good grades. The man's name was Dylan. She said he worked in finance, came from a respectable family, and was everything she'd ever dreamed of. I wanted to be happy for her, and I tried. But when I finally met Dylan, something about him didn't sit right with me. He had that smooth, charming tone men use when they're used to getting what they want. His eyes didn't meet mine for long. He was polite, too polite, like he was performing a role rather than being genuine. Still, I told myself I was being overprotective. Harper was an adult, and I needed to trust her judgment. When they announced their engagement, Harper was glowing, and that alone was enough for me to push my doubts aside. I offered to help with whatever I could, but she told me Dylan's family had it all handled. She said they were covering most of the expenses and that everything was under control. That should have made me feel relieved, but instead, it left a strange, hollow ache in my chest. When the wedding invitations were finally mailed, mine arrived much later than everyone else's. I remember thinking the post office must have delayed it, but a small voice inside me whispered that maybe it wasn't a mistake. The envelope looked different, my name printed slightly off-center, the handwriting unfamiliar. There was no +1, no mention of where I'd be seated, just the basic details. I didn't think too deeply about it at the time, I was just happy to be invited. But when I asked Harper why my invitation looked different, she hesitated before saying, "Oh, Mom, the planner must have mixed them up." I wanted to believe her, so I did. A few weeks before the wedding, I tried calling Harper several times, but she was always busy or at fittings. Dylan occasionally answered her phone, saying she'd call me back, but she rarely did. I told myself it was just the stress of the wedding. Every bride gets overwhelmed, right? On the morning of the big day, I woke up early, pulled my favorite navy blue dress from the closet, and paired it with the pearl earrings I'd saved for years. They weren't expensive, but they meant the world to me. They were a gift from my mother before she passed. I wanted Harper to see that I'd made an effort, that I was proud, and that I was there for her, no matter what. I even practiced my smile in the mirror, trying to hide the nerves fluttering in my stomach. When I arrived at the venue, I immediately felt out of place. It was grand, far grander than anything I'd ever seen. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, the marble floors gleamed like mirrors, and guests arrived in cars I'd only seen in magazines. Everyone looked polished, sophisticated, and impossibly elegant. I clutched my small purse tighter, trying not to feel like I didn't belong. As I walked in, I could feel eyes on me. People whispered, their gazes darting up and down my outfit. A woman in a sequined gown gave me a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. For a brief second, I wanted to turn around and leave, but then I thought of Harper. I wasn't going to let my insecurities ruin her day. I straightened my shoulders and walked to my assigned table. When I found my seat, my heart sank. It was at the farthest corner of the reception hall, near the catering doors. I tried to laugh it off, convincing myself it was just an oversight. I sipped some water, trying to steady my hands, and glanced toward the front. That's when I saw her, my daughter, standing near the altar, radiant in her white gown. She looked breathtaking. My eyes filled with tears. For that one moment, Everything else faded, the whispers, the distance, the doubts. She was happy, and that was all I'd ever wanted. But then she turned her head slightly, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. And for a brief second, our eyes met. I smiled, but she looked away almost instantly, as if she hadn't seen me. I told myself it was nerves, nothing more. Still, an uneasy feeling began to creep into my chest, cold and heavy. Something felt wrong. Something I couldn't quite name. But I couldn't have known that my presence alone would be treated as an offense. The morning of the wedding, I put on my best dress and the pearl earrings I'd saved for years. I wanted my daughter to see how proud I was. As I drove to the venue, I rehearsed what I'd say when I saw Harper. Maybe I'd tell her how beautiful she looked, how proud I was, how all those long nights and years of sacrifice were worth it. I wanted to believe that once we saw each other, all the tension would disappear. But as I pulled into the parking lot of the grand estate Dylan's family had rented for the ceremony, that tiny spark of hope began to flicker. The place looked like something out of a royal movie: stone fountains, ivy-covered walls, and staff in black uniforms guiding guests toward the entrance. My little sedan felt out of place among the polished black limousines and sports cars lined up outside. Still, I kept reminding myself, this isn't about appearances, it's about Harper. I took a deep breath, grabbed the small bouquet I'd brought for her, and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the venue was even more intimidating. The air smelled like roses and expensive champagne. A live quartet played softly in the background as well-dressed guests mingled, laughing and taking pictures. I scanned the room, searching for Harper. My heart skipped when I finally spotted her across the hall, radiant in her wedding gown. Her hair was pinned perfectly, her veil cascading down her shoulders like silk. For a moment, I forgot everything else that was my little girl. The same one I'd held through fevers and nightmares, now stepping into her new life. But when I lifted my hand to wave, she didn't look at me. She turned away, speaking quickly to one of her bridesmaids instead. My smile faltered. Maybe she just hadn't seen me, I thought. Then I saw Dylan standing near the bar with a group of his friends. He was laughing, a glass of champagne in hand, his tuxedo fitting him perfectly. When his eyes landed on me, the laughter stopped. His expression shifted not in surprise or warmth but irritation. He looked me up and down, slowly, then leaned toward one of his friends and whispered something that made them smirk. I felt my stomach tighten, but I pretended not to notice. I told myself not to make assumptions. A few minutes later, I walked toward Harper again, determined to speak with her before the ceremony began. But as I moved closer, one of the wedding planners, a tall woman with a headset, gently stepped in front of me. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said politely. "Family members are being asked to wait until after the photos." I blinked, confused. "I'm her mother," I said softly. The woman's expression flickered, then she quickly nodded and stepped aside, murmuring an apology. Still, the damage was done. Several nearby guests had heard her, and I could feel their eyes on me. I eventually found my seat, tucked away at the very back. It wasn't what I expected. Usually, the mother of the bride sits near the front, close to the action. I wanted to believe it was a mistake. But when I saw Dylan's parents sitting proudly at the center table, it became clear that my mistake was deliberate. I tried not to let it show. The ceremony began, and as Harper walked down the aisle, I held back tears. She looked so happy, so full of light. That was all I wanted for her happiness. Even if I was watching it from the shadows. During the vows, my heart swelled. Hearing her say "I do" felt like a victory, maybe not mine, but hers. When they kissed, the audience erupted in applause, and I clapped harder than anyone else. For a brief moment, I thought everything was fine again. I told myself I'd imagined the distance, the whispers, the tension. Maybe Harper just wanted to make sure everything went smoothly before acknowledging me. I was content to wait, but the unease returned during the reception. The music was loud, laughter filled the air, and waiters moved around with trays of champagne. I tried to blend in, to smile at strangers, to act like I belonged there. I approached the buffet and heard someone whisper behind me, "Is she with the catering team?" I turned and saw a young woman in an emerald green dress looking right at me. Her expression half curious, half condescending. My cheeks burned. "No," I said, forcing a polite smile. "I'm the bride's mother." The woman's eyes widened for a second before she looked away awkwardly. I felt the sting in my chest, but I told myself to stay calm. I watched Harper and Dylan move across the dance floor for their first dance. They looked perfect together, she glowing, he confident. I wanted to go up to her after the song, hug her, tell her how proud I was. But as I started to rise from my chair, Dylan's gaze swept across the room again and landed on me. This time, it wasn't irritation, I saw it was something colder. His lips curved into a faint smirk, and he leaned toward one of the security guards standing near the door. The guard nodded and started walking toward me. My chest tightened. I didn't know why, but I suddenly couldn't breathe. The guard stopped beside my table, his expression neutral but firm. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "May I see your invitation? Please?" Guests nearby turned to watch, whispering. I blinked in confusion, fumbling through my purse. "Of course," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "But why?" He didn't answer. He just looked back toward Dylan, who gave the faintest nod. My fingers shook as I handed him the envelope. He examined it, then whispered something into his earpiece. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares pressing down on me. My throat went dry, and I forced out a nervous laugh. "Is there a problem?" The guard didn't respond immediately. He just waited for another signal. I followed his eyes and saw Dylan, still watching me, his smirk growing wider. That was when I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding, this was deliberate. Then Dylan's eyes met mine cold. Deliberate, and I realized something bad was about to happen. It started when Dylan whispered something to a security guard during the reception. I saw it happen, that subtle lean forward, his lips barely moving, the guard's nod in response. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe he was just asking for another drink or checking on the schedule, but deep down, my gut screamed otherwise. The music played on, the guests laughed. And for a moment, I dared to hope I was wrong. Then I saw the guard make his way toward me again, his posture stiff, and his face unreadable. My stomach sank. He stopped beside my chair, towering over me as the chatter around us slowly quieted. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "I'm going to have to ask you to step outside." I froze. "Step outside?" I repeated, my voice catching. "Why?" The guard hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. He looked toward Dylan again, as if seeking approval. Dylan didn't even try to hide what he was doing this time. He lifted his glass in a mock toast toward me, smirking, then turned away to whisper something to another guest. My chest tightened, my pulse racing. "There must be some mistake," I said, standing slowly. "I'm the bride's mother." The words felt heavy, like they were being swallowed by the noise in the room. A few people gasped. The whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. "The bride's mother?" I heard someone say. "Why is she being asked to leave?" The guard's expression softened for a split second, but he kept his professional tone. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the groom has asked that you be escorted out." The words hit me like a physical blow. "The groom?" I said, staring in disbelief. "Why would he?" My voice cracked. "This is my daughter's wedding." I looked around, searching for Harper, but she was across the room, surrounded by bridesmaids and photographers, oblivious to the chaos unfolding behind her. I raised my voice, desperate. "Harper!" She didn't hear me. The band had started playing again, and my plea was swallowed by the music. By now, all eyes were on me. Guests whispered behind their hands, some even raising their phones to record. My face burned with humiliation. I turned to the guard again. "Please," I said softly. "There's been a misunderstanding. I'm her mother. I'm supposed to be here." The guard's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I'm just following orders." He reached gently for my arm, but I pulled back instinctively. "No," I said, my voice trembling. I'm not leaving. My daughter is getting married today, and I have every right to be here. That's when Dylan's voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding. Get her out of here. His tone was calm, but his words dripped with cruelty. The room went silent again. Even the band stopped playing mid-song. She's not supposed to be here, he said loudly, looking around at the crowd as if seeking validation. This is a private event. We can't have uninvited guests. Uninvited. The word echoed in my head, twisting my stomach. My throat felt dry. Uninvited? I repeated weakly. I'm Harper's mother. I looked toward my daughter again. And this time she turned. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene, me standing beside the guard, Dylan looking smug and composed. Mom, she said, her voice faint. What's going on? Before I could answer, Dylan cut in smoothly. Your mother wasn't supposed to be here, Harper, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. We talked about this. Harper blinked, confused. What are you talking about? She asked. Of course, she was supposed to be here. Dylan laughed softly. That kind of laugh meant to humiliate rather than amuse. Oh, come on, Harper. She wasn't even on the official guest list. I didn't want her ruining our day with her drama. The crowd gasped again. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. Ruining your day? I whispered. My voice cracked. All I've ever done is love my daughter. I looked at Harper, my heart breaking at the stunned expression on her face. She looked between me and Dylan, as if trying to make sense of what she was hearing. That's not true, she said quietly. You sent her an invitation, Dylan. But Dylan just shrugged. Maybe it was a mistake, he said coolly. But we can fix it now. Security, do your job. The guard stepped closer, and I stumbled back a step. Don't touch me, I said sharply, my voice trembling. My hands shook as I clutched my purse. Harper, please! I tried to reach for her, but Dylan stepped in front of her like a wall. Enough, he said coldly. You've embarrassed yourself enough already. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I straightened my back, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. You're making a mistake, I said softly. One day, Harper will see who you really are. Dylan smirked again, tilting his head. Maybe. But for now, she sees what I want her to see. His words sent a chill down my spine. I took a step back, the noise of murmurs and whispers filling my ears like a storm. The guards reached for my arm again, more insistent this time. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else. I could barely hear myself breathe. And just as I thought they were about to drag me out of the hall, a voice cut through the chaos, clear, firm, and filled with authority. As the guards grabbed my arm, a voice rang out from the head table, a woman's voice that made everyone stop. Stop right there, Miranda, Dylan's mother, said, her tone sharp enough to slice through the music. The sound of her voice froze every movement in the room. Even the band stopped mid-note, their instruments hanging in mid-air. All eyes turned toward her as she rose from her chair at the head table. Her presence was commanding, poised, elegant, and utterly in control. She didn't shout, but her words carried more power than a scream ever could. The guards halted instantly, releasing my arm as if they'd touched something forbidden. For a brief moment, the entire hall was wrapped in silence. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Miranda began walking toward us, her heels clicking against the marble floor in slow, deliberate steps. Each one echoed like a countdown. Dylan's smirk faltered, his jaw tightening as his mother approached. I'd only met Miranda once before, briefly, during an engagement dinner I hadn't been fully welcomed at. Even then, she had seemed distant, the kind of woman who measured everyone in dollars and bloodlines. But today, there was something different in her eyes, something fierce. What's going on here? She demanded, her voice calm but dangerously cold. She looked from me to the guards, then back to Dylan. The tension in the air was suffocating. No one dared move. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. I was just told to leave, I managed to say. My words sounded small in the cavernous room. They said I wasn't supposed to be here. Miranda turned her sharp gaze toward Dylan, Is that true? She asked, her voice low and steady. Dylan hesitated, his tongue darting out to wet his lips. Mother, it's nothing, he said finally, trying to laugh it off. Just a misunderstanding. She must have. Answer the question, Miranda interrupted, her tone slicing through his excuse. Did you tell security to remove her? The room collectively held its breath. Dylan gave a tense laugh, glancing around at the watching faces. Mother. Please, he said, his voice tight. This isn't the time or place for this. Miranda crossed her arms. It seems to me, she said slowly, that you made it the time and place. Dylan's composure cracked. She shouldn't even be here. He snapped suddenly, his voice echoing through the hall. Gasps rippled across the guests. Harper flinched, stepping closer to her husband. Dylan, she hissed. What are you doing? Dylan ignored her, his gaze locked on me with a venomous glare. She wasn't invited, he said firmly. I told you I didn't want any drama at this wedding, and this woman thrives on it. She's been trying to control Harper's life from the beginning. My stomach dropped. That's not true, I said softly. But my voice was drowned out by the shocked murmurs spreading across the room. Miranda's eyes narrowed. You mean to tell me, she said slowly, that you just ordered guards to throw out your wife's mother? At her own daughter's wedding? Dylan's expression faltered. Mother, you don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, she interrupted. You didn't want her here because she embarrasses you. Because she doesn't come from money. Her words landed like hammer blows, and the silence that followed was deafening. Dylan's face turned red. That's not it, he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his own panic. She's toxic, she's... Miranda cut him off again, her voice rising slightly for the first time. Enough, Dylan. She turned to me, her eyes softening. You're Harper's mother? She asked. I nodded weakly. Yes, I said. I raised her alone. For a second, Miranda's expression flickered, something like guilt flashing across her face. She inhaled deeply, her gaze shifting between me and Harper. You raised her alone? She repeated quietly. I nodded again, unable to trust my voice. Miranda's eyes hardened as she turned back to her son. And you didn't think that was worth telling me? She demanded. Dylan looked caught off guard. What does that have to do with anything? He said, his tone defensive. Miranda stepped closer, her face inches from his. Everything, she said firmly. You didn't tell me the woman you're marrying was raised by someone who gave her everything out of nothing. You let me believe lies about this family, Dylan. Lies you must have told yourself. The guests murmured louder now. Cameras and phones were subtly lifted again, recording every second. Harper's eyes filled with tears as she looked from her husband to me, her lips trembling. Mom, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I shook my head, forcing a small smile. It's not your fault, sweetheart, I whispered back. My voice trembled, but I kept it steady enough for her to hear. Miranda turned back toward me and gave a curt nod to the guards. You can leave her alone. She's not going anywhere. The guards stepped back immediately, retreating toward the walls. The tension in their bodies visibly eased. I took a shaky breath, my heart pounding. Thank you, I said quietly, my words barely audible. Miranda nodded once, her eyes still locked on her son. You should be thanking him, she said coldly, for showing everyone who he really is. Dylan's composure was crumbling now, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists at his sides. Mother, you're making a scene, he hissed. Miranda arched an eyebrow. No, Dylan. You made a scene. You humiliated your wife's mother in front of 200 people. You humiliated yourself. The crowd whispered again, louder this time. The air was electric with shock. Harper wiped her tears, her voice shaking as she spoke. Why would you do that? She asked him. Why would you treat my mom that way? Dylan didn't answer. He looked cornered, trapped. Miranda took one final step forward and turned to face the guests, her voice carrying effortlessly across the hall. You all deserve to know what kind of man my son really is, she said, her tone steady, almost regal. Because this, she gestured toward Dylan, isn't about a seating arrangement or an invitation mistake. This is about arrogance. And secrets. Dylan's head snapped toward her, panic flashing in his eyes. Mother, don't, he said quickly. But it was too late. Miranda's expression hardened, her decision already made. But then Miranda asked a question that froze everyone in place, one that revealed a secret no one saw. Coming. What exactly did you do to this woman, Dylan? Miranda demanded, her voice trembling with anger. The sound of her fury was sharper than any music that had ever played in that hall. Every whisper stopped, every fork froze midair. All eyes were locked on her and Dylan, who now looked pale beneath the golden light. I stood there, too stunned to speak, my heart racing as I tried to understand what was happening. Miranda's face was unreadable, but her tone told everyone that whatever was coming next would not be pleasant. Dylan tried to force a laugh, his composure cracking under his mother's glare. Mother, please, he said tightly, adjusting his tie. You're overreacting. This is ridiculous. But Miranda didn't move. She stared at him like a mother seeing her son clearly for the first time. No, she said slowly. What's ridiculous is that you thought you could get away with humiliating your wife's mother in public without consequences. I've seen you do cruel things before, Dylan. But this. She gestured toward me. This is beyond cruel. The room was silent except for the faint sound of someone recording on their phone. Harper stood frozen beside her husband, her face pale and her hands trembling. Mom, she whispered, her voice cracking. I'm so sorry. I swear I didn't know he. It's not your fault, sweetheart, I said softly, my eyes never leaving Dylan. This isn't on you. Miranda crossed her arms. Tell me, Dylan, she continued, her tone icy. Was humiliating her supposed to make you look powerful? Important? Did you think this family name gives you the right to treat people like dirt? Dylan clenched his jaw, his voice rising. You're making a scene, he snapped. You don't know the whole story. Miranda leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. Then enlighten me. Dylan hesitated. The silence stretched so long it became unbearable. Then, in a last-ditch attempt to regain control, he sneered. You wouldn't understand. She's not our kind of people. She doesn't fit in here. The words came out so venomous that the crowd audibly gasped. I felt my face flush with both anger and shame. But before I could speak, Miranda's hand slammed against the table beside her, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot. Not our kind of people? She repeated, her voice shaking. Do you even hear yourself? Dylan opened his mouth, but Miranda didn't let him finish. You sound just like your father, she spat. Cold, arrogant, obsessed with appearances. Dylan stiffened. Leave him out of this, he muttered, his voice low. Miranda ignored him. You know, she continued, turning toward the guests, I told myself that after what happened with your last engagement, you'd learned something. But I see now that you haven't changed at all. A ripple of confusion spread through the guests. People began whispering, glancing between them. Last engagement? Someone murmured nearby. Harper turned sharply toward Dylan, her expression confused. What is she talking about? She asked, her voice trembling. Dylan looked trapped, like a man watching his carefully built life crumble in slow motion. Mother, stop, he hissed. This isn't the time. Miranda ignored him. No, this is exactly the time, she said. Because people need to know who they're dealing with. She turned to the guests again. 2 years ago, Dylan was engaged to another woman, a kind, sweet girl named Brielle. She came from a modest family, just like Harper. And do you know what he did to her? The crowd went still. He humiliated her in front of everyone, Miranda continued. At their engagement party, he made a cruel joke about her background, about her father being a mechanic, and when she confronted him, he told her she wasn't fit to marry into our family. The next day, he broke it off, leaving her heartbroken and humiliated. Gasps spread through the hall. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Harper looked at Dylan in disbelief. Is that true? she demanded. Tell me she's lying. Dylan's face turned red, his composure completely shattered now. That's ancient history, he said quickly. It's not what it sounds like. Harper's voice rose. Not what it sounds like? You just did the same thing again this time to my mother. Miranda's voice was steady but filled with disappointment. You didn't learn a thing, did you? She said quietly. I warned you that pride would destroy you, Dylan. And here we are. Dylan looked desperate now. Mother, please, he said, his voice cracking. You're embarrassing me. Miranda shook her head. No, Dylan. You embarrassed yourself the moment you decided to treat kindness like weakness. I stood silently, my emotions swirling shock, anger, sadness, and something else I couldn't name. For years, I'd blamed myself for not being enough, for not fitting into Harper's new world. But now, seeing Dylan's own mother call him out, I realized the problem had never been me. Miranda turned to Harper, her tone softening. My dear, she said, you deserve better. You deserve honesty, love, and respect, not manipulation. Harper's eyes filled with tears as she shook her head. I can't believe this, she whispered. I thought I knew him. Dylan tried to speak again, but his voice faltered. You don't understand. I was just trying to protect you, he said to Harper, reaching for her hand. She pulled it away. Protect me? She repeated, her tone trembling with anger. From what, my own mother? Miranda turned her gaze back to her son, her voice quiet but deadly. You've spent your whole life trying to control people, Dylan. And now you've lost the only ones who ever truly cared about you. The guests murmured again, the truth settling like dust after an explosion. Dylan looked around, desperate, his mask of arrogance finally slipping away. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like a mother who had finally been seen and vindicated. Miranda gave me a nod, one that said she understood, perhaps for the first time. Harper's tears turned into quiet sobs as she looked at me, guilt and heartbreak mixing in her eyes. Mom, she whispered, I don't even know what to say. I put my hand on hers. You don't have to say anything, I told her softly. Just listen. And as the crowd waited in stunned silence, Miranda straightened her posture and looked directly at her son. Her next words were calm, deliberate, and chilling. Then Miranda said something that made me realize she wasn't just defending me, she was about to expose her own son completely. Dylan, tell them what you did with Harper's inheritance, Miranda said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Every sound, every whisper, every rustle of a dress stopped at once. I blinked, my mind struggling to process what I'd just heard. Inheritance? Harper's head turned sharply toward Dylan, confusion clouding her tear-stained face. What is she talking about? She asked, her voice trembling. Dylan froze, his lips parting but no sound coming out. Miranda took a step forward, her voice gaining strength. Go on, Dylan, she said coldly. Tell your wife how you've been funding your little business projects. Tell her whose money you've been using. A murmur swept through the guests like a wave. Dylan's face turned pale, then red, then pale again. Mother, don't, he said quietly, almost pleading. But Miranda didn't stop. You took money that wasn't yours, she continued. Money that this woman, she gestured toward, Amy, worked her entire life to save for her daughter. My knees went weak. I gripped the edge of a nearby table for balance. What are you saying? I whispered. Miranda turned to me, her expression softening. Selena, the trust fund you set up for Harper, the one she was supposed to receive after her graduation, he accessed it. My stomach dropped. That's impossible, I said, shaking my head. I set it up years ago, under her name. She was the only one with access. Miranda nodded grimly. And yet, he found a way. He convinced Harper to sign a few routine forms during their engagement forms that gave him joint access. Harper's eyes widened, her face draining of color. No, she whispered, that can't be true. Dylan stepped forward, his tone desperate now. Harper, please, listen to me. I didn't steal anything. I just borrowed it. I was going to put it back after the wedding. His words tumbled out quickly, tripping over each other. I used it to pay for things we needed: the venue, the catering, the photographer. Harper's voice rose, breaking into a sharp cry. You used my mother's money for this? She shouted, gesturing around the lavish room. The guests gasped. Do you have any idea how hard she worked for that? Dylan's composure cracked completely. It wasn't like that, he shouted back. I was investing in our future. My business needed funding, and your mother's savings were just sitting there. You thought you could steal it. I interrupted, my voice low but trembling with rage. That's what you thought. He turned toward me, his expression morphing into something darker, a mix of shame and defiance. You wouldn't understand, he spat. You've never had to think bigger than your own tiny world. The audacity of his words hit me so hard I almost laughed. My tiny world? I said quietly. That tiny world put food in your wife's mouth when she was a child. That tiny world kept her safe when her father walked out. You don't get to belittle it. The crowd murmured again. Some guests shaking their heads. Others filming with wide eyes. Miranda's lips pressed into a thin line. You see what happens when people grow up thinking money makes them invincible? She said bitterly. They start to think morals are optional. Dylan rubbed his temples, pacing now. This is getting out of hand, he muttered. You're twisting everything. Miranda raised her chin. Really? Then explain how you took $50,000 out of her trust account 3 months before the wedding. Gasps filled the room. Harper's knees buckled slightly, and I caught her arm just in time to keep her from falling. 50,000? She whispered, her voice breaking. You told me your uncle gave you that money for the down payment. Dylan froze, his mouth opening and closing uselessly. Harper, he said weakly. I was going to pay it back once the business turned around. What business? Miranda shot back. The one that's been failing for 2 years? The one you've been lying about to everyone? His face twisted with anger. You don't know anything about my business, he shouted at his mother. Miranda stood her ground. Oh, I know plenty, she said firmly. I know you've drained every account I gave you access to. I know you've lied about profits and made fake reports. And now, I know you've dragged this innocent girl and her mother into your mess. Harper's voice cracked as she spoke again. Is it true, Dylan? Did you really use my inheritance? He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, breathing heavily. That silence was enough. Harper's tears spilled over as she took off her wedding ring and placed it on the table. I don't even recognize you, she whispered. For a long, painful moment, no one moved. Even the staff had stopped working. The air was thick with disbelief and shame. I stood there, watching the man who had promised my daughter the world unravel before my eyes. And even though a part of me felt vindicated, the mother in me ached for Harper's pain. Miranda sighed, her shoulders heavy. I wanted this day to be special, she said softly. But it looks like it's turned into a reckoning instead. She looked around at the guests. I'm sorry you all had to witness this. But maybe it's time my son learned that money can't buy character. Dylan's voice rose suddenly, breaking the silence. You think you're so perfect, Mother? He snapped. You're not! You've been hiding things too. The tension shifted again, the crowd collectively leaning forward. Miranda's expression remained calm, but her eyes narrowed. Careful, Dylan, she warned. But Dylan wasn't finished. He grabbed the microphone from the band's stand, his voice echoing through the hall. You all think she's a saint? He said, gesturing toward me. You think she's the victim here? Ask her what she did to her own family. Ask her why she's really alone. His eyes locked on mine, burning with bitterness. My stomach turned cold. I knew where this was going. Don't, I whispered, but he smiled a cruel, broken smile. Oh, I think it's time everyone knew who she really is. He turned toward the guests, ready to destroy whatever dignity I had left. Before Harper could speak, Dylan grabbed the microphone and said something that turned every head toward me. You all think she's innocent? Dylan sneered into the microphone. Ask her why she wasn't invited properly, she's toxic. The word hung in the air like poison. I froze where I stood. Every eye in that hall suddenly fixed on me. For a second, the room tilted. My ears rang, my hands trembling at my sides. Toxic? I whispered, unable to believe what I was hearing. Dylan paced in front of the stage like a performer feeding off chaos. His voice grew louder, each word sharper, uglier. You all see this poor single mother who worked hard for her daughter, right? Well, let me tell you who she really is. His smirk widened as the whispers rippled through the crowd. Manipulative, the kind of woman who uses guilt to keep her daughter close. She couldn't handle letting go of Harper, so she tried to sabotage us from the start. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to shout, to deny it. But the words caught in my chest. Harper looked stunned, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't form words. That's not true, she said faintly, shaking her head. But Dylan was on a roll, drunk on attention. She called me before the wedding, he continued, his tone slick with false pity. Begged me to postpone it. Said Harper wasn't ready, that she was making a mistake. And when I told her no, she threatened to show up and ruin everything. Sound familiar? Gasps rippled across the room. My vision blurred. That's a lie, I said, my voice breaking. I never... But he talked over me. You think she's selfless? She's not. She's jealous. She couldn't stand the idea of her daughter marrying someone successful. He gestured toward me dramatically. She's been bitter ever since Harper started building a life without her. The crowd murmured louder now. I could see faces shifting confusion, discomfort, curiosity. Some even looked sympathetic toward him. My body trembled. The humiliation was unbearable. My throat tightened as I tried again to speak. That's not who I am, I said quietly, barely audible over the noise. I just wanted her to be happy. Dylan turned to me, his expression cruelly triumphant. Oh, really? He mocked. Because I have the messages to prove it. He pulled out his phone and waved it in the air. You texted Harper that she was throwing her life away for me, didn't you? I swallowed hard. That part was true, but it wasn't said with malice. It was said out of fear. Out of a mother's instinct. I was worried, I said softly. I didn't mean... He interrupted again, raising his voice. She couldn't stand to see Harper happy without her. So she played the victim. Like she's doing right now. His tone turned mocking. Theatrical. Oh, poor me, the hard-working single mom. Everyone applauded her for her sacrifices. A few people laughed nervously, unsure which side to take. My eyes filled with tears. I wanted to disappear. Then, suddenly, a voice cut through the noise, firm, powerful, unwavering. That's enough, Dylan. Miranda's tone was sharp as glass. She stepped forward, her face pale with disgust. You have no shame, she said. Dylan spun toward her, startled. Mother, stay out of this. But Miranda didn't back down. No, I've stayed out of your messes long enough. I know a liar when I see one, and unfortunately, I raised one. The hall went utterly silent. Even Dylan froze, his jaw tightening. Miranda turned to the crowd, her voice steady but full of conviction. This woman, she said, gesturing toward me, has shown more dignity in the last 5 minutes than my son has in his entire life. Don't believe a single word that comes out of his mouth, Dylan scoffed, trying to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. You're embarrassing yourself, he said, though his confidence was faltering. Miranda took a step closer. No, Dylan, she said quietly. You're embarrassing me. You've spent your whole life thinking you could buy respect. But respect isn't bought, it's earned. The guests began whispering again. But this time, the tone had shifted. People were looking at Dylan differently now, not as a victim, but as a spoiled man unraveling in real time. Harper's tears streamed down her cheeks. She looked at me, shaking her head as though trying to wake from a nightmare. Mom, I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly despite the stares. It's okay, I whispered. You see the truth now. That's all that matters. Dylan, cornered, laughed bitterly. "Oh, how touching," he said. "You've both always been the same, emotional, manipulative, weak." Miranda's face darkened. "Enough," she snapped. "Do you even hear yourself? You're standing in front of everyone, destroying your marriage, humiliating your wife's family, and still trying to act superior." Dylan's smirk finally broke, replaced by raw anger. "You're taking her side?" he shouted. "After everything I've done for this family?" Miranda looked at him sadly. "You haven't done anything for this family except tarnish its name," she said softly. "And I'm done pretending otherwise." The silence that followed was heavy, like the air itself had turned to stone. Harper pulled away from me and faced her husband. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were fierce. "You need to leave," she said quietly. "Right now." Dylan looked stunned. "What?" "You heard me," she said. "Leave. Before you humiliate yourself any further." For a moment, it looked like he might refuse. But then Miranda stepped forward, her eyes locked on his. "Do as she says, Dylan," she ordered. "This isn't your stage anymore." He glared at both of us, seething, his pride bleeding out of him in silence. "You're all going to regret this," he muttered. "Every single one of you." Then he turned, walking away with slow, deliberate steps. The crowd parted to let him pass, the whispers following him like shadows. As soon as the doors closed behind him, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever. The tears I'd held back finally fell. Harper clung to me, sobbing into my shoulder. Miranda stood nearby, her hands trembling, her face etched with shame and sorrow. It felt like the storm had passed, but deep down, I knew it hadn't. Dylan wasn't finished. But Dylan wasn't done. He had one last cruel card to play, and it involved my past. "Maybe everyone should know why Harper's dad left," Dylan shouted, smirking. The words pierced through the quiet room like a blade. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. My body went cold, my fingers numb as my mind scrambled to make sense of what he'd just said. I felt Harper stiffen beside me. "Dylan, stop," she said, her voice shaking. "Don't you dare." But Dylan only smiled wider, enjoying every second of the chaos he was creating. He turned to the audience, spreading his arms dramatically. "Oh, she didn't tell you?" he said mockingly. "Of course she didn't. She spent her whole life pretending to be this perfect, struggling mother who was abandoned. But the truth is, she drove her husband away." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I felt my throat tighten, my pulse hammering in my ears. "You don't know what you're talking about," I said softly. But he talked right over me, his voice growing louder, crueler. "Oh, I know plenty. Harper told me everything, how her dad couldn't stand living in that tiny apartment anymore. How Selena's constant nagging and bitterness pushed him out. Isn't that right, Selena?" His voice was full of mock sympathy, the kind that made my skin crawl. I could barely speak. My eyes blurred with tears. But I stood tall, refusing to let him see me break. "You have no idea what happened," I said quietly. Dylan laughed, sharp and mean. "Then why don't you tell everyone? Go ahead, tell them how your husband left because you couldn't let him breathe. Tell them how you turned every bit of his love into guilt." Harper's voice cracked through the noise. "That's not true," she shouted. "Stop it, Dylan! You don't know what you're saying." Dylan turned to her, his expression twisting. "Oh, come on, Harper. You told me yourself that your parents used to fight all the time. You said she used to throw things, cry, scream. Doesn't that sound like someone who's unstable?" The world around me blurred. I could barely hear the murmurs of the guests anymore. All I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my head. My knees felt weak, but I refused to fall. I forced myself to meet his eyes. "You're digging through wounds you don't understand," I said quietly. "My marriage wasn't perfect, but I never drove him away. He left because he couldn't handle responsibility. He left because when life got hard, he ran." Dylan smirked, unbothered by my trembling voice. "Oh, sure," he said mockingly. "It's always someone else's fault, isn't it? You've been playing the victim your whole life." The crowd was silent now, every eye on us. The air was heavy with tension and shame. I saw a few guests lower their phones, realizing they were witnessing something far uglier than gossip. Harper stepped forward, tears running down her cheeks. "You have no right," she said, her voice breaking. "You have no right to talk about my family," Dylan scoffed. "Your family? You mean her? The woman who kept you from seeing your father for years?" I inhaled sharply. "Because he didn't want to see her," I said firmly. My voice grew steadier with every word. "I protected Harper from a man who didn't care enough to stay. I didn't badmouth him. I didn't poison her against him. I told her the truth when she was old enough to hear it, that sometimes people leave, and you don't get the closure you deserve." For the first time, Dylan hesitated. His smirk faltered just slightly, but he covered it with another cruel laugh. "Touching," he said. "Really touching. Did you also tell her about the letters you sent him after he left? The ones begging him to come back? The ones where you said you'd do anything if he returned?" My stomach dropped. I hadn't thought about those letters in over 20 years. I'd written them during the darkest months of my life, desperate, heartbroken, drowning in fear that my daughter would grow up without a father. "You went through my things," I whispered, realization dawning. "You found those in Harper's storage boxes." Dylan smiled smugly. "So you admit it?" "Of course I admit it," I said, my voice trembling. "I was young, I was scared. I made mistakes, but none of that gives you the right to weaponize my pain." The guests exchanged uneasy glances. A few looked disgusted, not at me, but at him. Harper stared at Dylan like she was seeing him for the first time. "You went through my things?" she asked quietly, her voice breaking. "You read my mother's letters? How could you?" Dylan shrugged. "I had to know who I was really marrying." Miranda's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You had no right," she said, stepping forward. Her eyes burned with fury. "Those letters weren't yours to touch. That woman gave everything to raise her daughter. You don't get to turn her pain into your entertainment." For the first time, Dylan looked uneasy. "You're all acting like she's some kind of saint," he muttered. "She's just as messed up as the rest of us." Miranda's tone was calm but cold. "Maybe," she said, "but the difference is she owns her mistakes. You exploit them." The room filled with whispers again, but this time they weren't directed at me. They were directed at him. Guests were shaking their heads, whispering words like disgusting, heartless, and unbelievable. Dylan's confidence started to crack. Harper wiped her tears, her voice trembling but strong. "I can forgive my mother for being human," she said. "But I'll never forgive you for being cruel." Dylan blinked, stunned by her words. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. "Harper," he said softly, "I didn't mean." But Harper shook her head. "You meant every word," she said. "You just didn't expect everyone to see the kind of man you really are." Miranda turned to Dylan, her eyes blazing. "You've done enough damage for one lifetime." Then she faced the crowd and took a deep breath. Her next words were slow, deliberate, and devastating. "I think it's time everyone knew the full truth about my son and about me." The room fell silent again. All eyes turned to Miranda as she stepped toward the microphone, her hands steady despite the weight of what she was about to say. But before Dylan could respond, Miranda walked up to the microphone, and what she said next ended the wedding entirely. "Dylan, you're not the only one with secrets," Miranda began. Her voice was calm but heavy with something that felt final, the kind of tone that silences a room before a storm. Every person in that hall turned toward her. Dylan's face paled, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. Miranda stood tall, her hand gripping the microphone stand. "You want to talk about the past?" she said, her tone unwavering. "Fine. Let's talk about it. You think your mother doesn't know what it's like to hide behind lies? To protect an image at the expense of truth?" She looked directly at her son. "You learned that from me." The room was so silent you could hear the faint hum of the lights. Miranda took a breath and continued. "For years, I let my husband build his empire on the backs of people he used and discarded. He called it business. But it was greed pure, cold greed. We looked down on anyone who didn't live in our world, anyone who didn't speak our language of money. And I told myself that was normal, that it was fine because it gave us a name, a reputation, a future. But it didn't. It gave us a curse, one that my son inherited. Gasps rippled across the hall. Even the staff had stopped moving. Miranda's eyes glistened as she spoke. I thought I could fix it by raising Dylan differently. But I didn't. I spoiled him. I made excuses when he hurt people. I told him he deserved the best because we had the means to give it to him. And now I'm standing here watching the man my son has become, a man who humiliates a woman who's done nothing but love her daughter. And I know exactly where he learned it. Dylan's voice cracked as he finally spoke. Stop it, he said, his tone low and pleading. Don't do this here. Miranda looked at him sadly. Why not? You had no problem humiliating your wife's mother in front of everyone. Why should the truth suddenly make you uncomfortable? He stepped forward, his anger resurfacing. This isn't about you, Mother. You're trying to make me look bad. Miranda let out a small, humorless laugh. You did that yourself, Dylan. I'm just cleaning up the mess. She turned toward the crowd again. Her voice soft but firm. You all see this venue, these decorations, this perfect image of wealth and refinement, but it's all built on broken promises. The man you just watched throw his wife's mother out of her own daughter's wedding? He's a product of a lie I let live for too long. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. I'd never imagined this elegant, composed woman would stand there exposing her own family for the sake of truth. But she wasn't done. You see, she continued, my husband and I built our reputation by pretending to be better than others. We never cared who we stepped on. And when I started feeling guilty, I buried that guilt under luxury. I told myself it didn't matter. But watching what happened today, watching Dylan become the same heartless man his father was, I realized the truth matters more than pride. Harper's hand tightened around mine. I glanced at her, and she whispered, She's doing this for you, Mom. My throat tightened with emotion. Miranda turned to me then, her expression soft but full of sorrow. Selena, she said, I owe you an apology, not just for what happened today, but for what I allowed my son to become. You raised your daughter with love, and I let mine be raised by fear of judgment. You're the better mother, and I see that now. Tears blurred my vision. I shook my head. You don't owe me anything, I said quietly. You didn't do this. He did. Miranda's lips pressed into a thin line. Maybe. But I'm the one who made him think it was acceptable. Dylan's anger snapped. Stop pretending you're some martyr, he shouted. You're acting like I'm the only one who's ever done wrong. You were never a saint, Mother. Miranda turned to him slowly, her gaze steady. No, I wasn't. But I'm trying to make it right. Something you clearly don't know how to do. The guests whispered again, shifting uncomfortably. Dylan's chest heaved as he ran a hand through his hair. You've ruined everything, he hissed. Everything. Miranda shook her head. No, Dylan. You ruined everything the moment you decided cruelty was a sign of strength. Her words landed hard, echoing across the hall. Harper took a small step forward. You've hurt everyone who ever cared about you, she said softly. My mother. Me. Even your own mother. For what? To look powerful? Dylan looked at her, his eyes wild. I loved you, he said, his voice cracking. Everything I did was for us. Harper shook her head slowly. No, she said. Everything you did was for yourself. The tension was unbearable. Miranda took a deep breath and spoke again, this time to the entire room. I should have stopped this long ago, she said. But I was too afraid of what people would think. I'm not afraid anymore. She turned to Dylan, her tone final. You need help, Dylan. And until you find it, you're on your own. Dylan stared at her, disbelief written across his face. What are you saying? He asked, his voice trembling. Miranda straightened her shoulders, her jaw firm. I'm saying you're cut off. From the business, the accounts, the family name, all of it. You'll leave this hall today with nothing but the consequences of your own actions. The guests gasped, some even whispering to each other in shock. Dylan looked around wildly, searching for sympathy, but found none. Even his closest friends avoided his gaze. Harper's face was streaked with tears, but her voice was steady when she said, "You should go." Dylan looked between us, me, Harper, and his mother, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice trembling. "Both of you." Miranda didn't flinch. "Maybe," she said softly, "but at least I'll be able to live with myself." He stood there for a long moment, shaking his head, before turning and storming toward the doors. The heavy sound of them slamming shut echoed through the hall like the final punctuation to a long, bitter chapter. No one spoke for several seconds. The silence felt sacred, the kind that follows a truth too powerful to deny. Then Miranda exhaled, setting the microphone down gently. She turned toward me, her eyes tired but full of resolve. "It's over," she said quietly. But I could tell she wasn't done, not yet. There was still something more to come. Then Miranda said the words that would destroy his reputation forever. "You're cut off, Dylan," Miranda declared, loud enough for the cameras to capture. The words struck the room like thunder. The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved, no one breathed. Even the hum of stand, the air conditioner seemed to pause. Dylan froze mid-step, his shoulders stiffening. Slowly, he turned to face his mother, disbelief etched across his face. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice trembling. Miranda didn't waver. "You heard me. You're cut off financially, professionally, completely." Her tone was calm, but every syllable carried the weight of finality. For a moment, it was as if the world tilted off its axis. Guests gasped quietly. I could hear the faint sound of a camera shutter clicking. Someone had captured the exact moment Dylan's mask cracked. "You can't do that," he said, his voice rising. "You can't just—" "I can," Miranda interrupted sharply. "And I am. You've humiliated this family, and yourself, for the last time." Dylan's face twisted in rage. "You're making a mistake," he said, pacing now like a caged animal. "Do you know how this looks? Everyone's recording this, Mother. You're ruining our name." Miranda's expression remained composed. "No, Dylan," she said quietly. "You did that all on your own." He scoffed, trying to regain control, but the desperation in his voice betrayed him. "You think these people care about your moral high ground? They'll move on by tomorrow." Miranda shook her head. "Maybe they will, but for once in your life, you won't have money to hide behind." The guests began whispering again, their voices a low buzz of shock and disbelief. I could see some of them former business partners, friends, investors exchanging uneasy glances. Word was already spreading. I could feel it. Within hours, the story would hit social media. The groom publicly disowned by his mother at his own wedding. Harper stood beside me, tears still glistening on her cheeks, but her posture was steady. "Mom," she whispered, "I want to end this marriage, right now." I looked at her, stunned. "Harper, maybe—" "No," she said firmly, cutting me off. "He's done enough. I don't want to spend another minute tied to him." Her voice didn't shake. It was the sound of someone reclaiming her power. Dylan turned toward her, his anger shifting to panic. "You can't be serious," he said, his voice cracking. "We're married, Harper. You can't just walk away like this." Harper looked him straight in the eyes. "Watch me." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Some guests even clapped softly. Dylan's face flushed deep red. "You can't do this," he shouted, pointing at Miranda. "You can't take everything from me." Miranda tilted her head slightly. "I'm not taking anything," she said coolly. "I'm just stopping you from taking from everyone else." He opened his mouth to argue. But before he could, Miranda raised her hand. "Security," she said calmly. Two guards stepped forward immediately, their movements swift but controlled. Dylan's eyes widened. "You're seriously throwing me out?" he asked, incredulous. Miranda gave a faint nod. "It's poetic justice, don't you think?" The guests watched in stunned silence as the guards approached. Dylan stepped back, his tone shifting from anger to desperation. "Mother, please," he said. "You can't do this to me. You're all I have left." Miranda's expression softened just slightly for a moment. I saw the flicker of a mother's heartbreak, but it faded as quickly as it appeared. "No, Dylan," she said quietly. "You had love, you had respect, you had a family, but you chose pride instead." The guards gently but firmly took Dylan by the arm. He struggled for a moment trying to shake them off, but it was useless. The strength he thought he had, the illusion of power, evaporated in front of 200 witnesses. As he was escorted toward the doors, he turned to face the crowd one last time. "You're all hypocrites," he yelled. "Every one of you. Like you're better than me." No one responded. No one clapped. No one spoke. The only sound was his own voice echoing back at him as he stormed out, the heavy doors closing behind him with a dull thud. The noise of the latch clicking seemed to seal more than the doors, it sealed the end of everything he'd built on lies. When he was gone, a strange stillness settled over the hall. I stood there beside Harper, my mind spinning. Miranda placed a hand on the microphone again, her voice softer now. "I apologize to everyone who came here expecting a celebration," she said. "What you witnessed instead was the collapse of a legacy that should never have existed in the first place." Then she turned to me. "Selena," she said quietly, "I owe you more than words. You were wronged here today in ways no mother should ever experience. I can't erase what happened, but I can try to make it right." Her sincerity took me by surprise. "You don't owe me anything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've already done more than enough." But she shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "Not yet." She turned to Harper. "And you, my dear, you're free now. Don't carry his mistakes as your burden. You've already paid enough." Harper's eyes filled with tears again. But this time, they weren't tears of pain, they were of release. "Thank you," she said softly. "For standing up for my mom. For standing up for the truth." The guests slowly began to applaud, hesitant at first, then stronger, until the entire room was clapping. Not for the drama, not for the scandal, but for the courage that had just unfolded in front of them. Miranda smiled faintly, a mix of sorrow and relief crossing her face. I felt tears on my cheeks, but for the first time in years, they weren't from humiliation or heartbreak. They were from gratitude. Gratitude that truth had finally won. As the applause died down, Miranda stepped closer to me, her expression thoughtful. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you later," she said softly. "Something important." I nodded, unsure of what she meant, but grateful nonetheless. For the first time that day, I felt the tension in my chest loosen. The storm had passed. But as I stood there in the echo of applause, one thought lingered in my mind: what could Miranda possibly want from me now? But I didn't expect what Miranda would do next, something that would change my life forever. "Selena," Miranda said gently, "I owe you more than an apology." Her tone had softened now. The sharpness that once cut through the room was gone, replaced with quiet sincerity. The crowd had thinned after Dylan's removal, but a few guests lingered, still whispering about what they'd just witnessed. Harper stood beside me, her hand wrapped tightly around mine. My body still trembled from the chaos, but Miranda's voice steadied me somehow. I turned toward her, unsure of what she meant. "You've already done enough," I said softly. "You stopped him when no one else would." Miranda shook her head, her expression heavy with guilt. "Stopping him isn't the same as repairing what he broke," she said. "And what he broke today wasn't just your dignity, it was your peace. I can't give you back the years of struggle, but I can at least make sure this moment doesn't define you." I frowned slightly, confused. "What are you talking about?" She took a deep breath, as if steadying herself. "I've made arrangements to cover all of Harper's legal fees for the annulment," she said. "Everything, the lawyers, the paperwork, whatever she needs to be free from him. And I'll make sure it happens quickly." Harper's lips parted in shock. "Miranda, that's not necessary," she said. "You've already done enough." Miranda shook her head again, her tone firm but kind. "It is necessary. Dylan's actions aren't your burden to carry. I can't undo his cruelty, but I can make sure neither of you suffers for it." My throat tightened as emotion welled up. "You don't have to do that," I whispered. "You don't owe us anything." Miranda looked at me for a long moment, her eyes softening. Maybe I do, she said quietly. Because I spent years watching people like you, good, hard-working people, be dismissed by families like mine, and I let it happen. I looked the other way because it was easier than confronting the truth. I don't want to look away anymore. Her honesty stunned me. For the first time, I saw not the intimidating socialite who once looked down on me, but a woman who had carried her own regrets. Harper stepped closer, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to do any of this, but it means more than you know." Miranda reached out and placed her hand gently on Harper's shoulder. "You remind me of who I used to be before I learned to measure people by their bank accounts." The three of us stood there for a moment, surrounded by the fading murmurs of guests. The once lavish reception hall now felt smaller, humbler, stripped of its illusions. The champagne glasses and expensive centerpieces looked meaningless in the aftermath of truth. "I'm sorry for what you had to go through today," Miranda said, turning to me again. "It was cruel and humiliating. But I need you to understand something: you didn't deserve it. You've spent your life fighting for your daughter, and that's something worth more than all of this." I wiped a tear from my cheek. "All I ever wanted was for Harper to be happy," I said softly. "I didn't care about the money, the name, or the luxury. I just wanted her to be loved," Miranda nodded slowly. "And now she will be by people who truly value her." Harper squeezed my hand, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've always been my home, Mom. I don't know why I ever let him make me doubt that." I turned to her, smiling through my tears. "Because you loved him," I said gently. "And love can make us blind to what's right in front of us." Miranda watched us quietly for a moment, then reached into her clutch and pulled out a small envelope. "There's one more thing," she said, handing it to me. "I know you run a small charity for single mothers. I've done some reading about it." My eyes widened slightly. "You know about that?" "I do," she said. "And I admire what you've built with so little. I'd like to contribute." I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a check, a large one. The kind of donation that could keep my program running for years. My hands shook as I stared at the number, too stunned to speak. "Miranda," I whispered. "I can't accept this." She smiled softly. "You can, and you will. Consider it not a favor, but a correction, a small attempt to balance the scales." I looked at Harper, who nodded through her tears. "She's right, Mom," she said. "Take it. You've helped so many women, now it's your turn to be helped." My chest ached with emotion as I looked back at Miranda. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "You have no idea what this means." Miranda reached out and squeezed my hand gently. "It's I who should be thanking you," she said. "You reminded me that real strength isn't in reputation or wealth, it's in the quiet endurance of women like you." The weight of her words filled the space between us, fragile yet powerful. For the first time that day, the air didn't feel suffocating, it felt light. Harper leaned her head against my shoulder, and I felt something deep inside me settle, as if all the years of struggle, loneliness, and sacrifice had finally been seen. Miranda glanced around at the emptying hall, her expression softening. "Go home," she said quietly. "Rest. Start over, both of you. Let this day be the last time anyone ever makes you feel small." I nodded, my voice too thick with emotion to respond. Harper and I turned toward the doors, our steps slow but certain. As we walked out into the cool evening air, I felt the sting of humiliation fade, replaced by something far stronger: hope. Behind us, Miranda stayed in the hall, speaking quietly to the event staff, settling bills, arranging the cleanup. For the first time in her life, perhaps, she was taking responsibility not for appearances, but for truth. As Harper and I reached the car, she looked up at the night sky and whispered, "I think Grandma would be proud of you, Mom." I smiled, the ache in my chest giving way to warmth. "Maybe she's watching right now," I said. And for the first time in years, I truly believed it. But there was still one thing left undone: confronting the man who'd caused it all. I found Dylan sitting alone in the parking lot, his tux jacket crumpled and his face red with anger. The night air was cool, carrying the faint hum of cars passing in the distance. The glittering venue lights cast long shadows across the asphalt, and there he was, the man who had turned my daughter's wedding into a battlefield. He looked smaller somehow, shrunken beneath the weight of everything he'd lost. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. I stepped closer, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. He didn't look up. "Come to gloat?" he asked bitterly, his voice hoarse. "To tell me I got what I deserved?" I stopped a few feet away, crossing my arms. "No," I said softly. "I came to make sure you don't try to twist this into another lie." He laughed dryly, still not meeting my eyes. "You think I have the energy for that?" he muttered. "My own mother just destroyed me in front of half the city. There's nothing left to lie about." For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of distant music. Someone had restarted the band inside, probably trying to salvage what remained of the evening. I studied him silently. The confidence he'd worn like armor was gone. In its place was a hollow man, his pride cracked and bleeding. "I didn't want it to end like this," I said finally. "Not for Harper. Not for you, either." He scoffed, finally lifting his head. His eyes were red, angry. But behind them was something else, fear. "You think I care what you wanted?" he snapped. "You ruined my life." I shook my head slowly. "No, Dylan. You did that to yourself." He stood abruptly, stumbling slightly, his voice rising with bitterness. "You think you're so innocent," he said. "You think you've won, don't you?" I didn't answer. I let him pour his venom, let him burn through it until the fire turned to ash. "My whole life," he continued, "I've been told I wasn't enough. My father treated me like I was a disappointment, and my mother, she just watched. She only cared about appearances. So yeah, I made mistakes. But at least I tried to be someone." His voice cracked on the last word, and for a fleeting second, I saw the frightened boy beneath the arrogance. But then his tone hardened again. "You think Harper's better off without me?" he asked bitterly. "She's not. She'll see soon enough that you've poisoned her against me." I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "I didn't poison her, Dylan. You showed her who you really are. All I did was tell the truth, something you've avoided your whole life." He glared at me, his jaw tight. "You think you're perfect, don't you? The martyr mother. The noble victim." I shook my head. "I'm far from perfect," I said quietly. "But I know the difference between mistakes and cruelty. You crossed that line when you decided my pain was entertainment." Dylan looked away, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to lash out again, to reclaim control. But the fight had gone out of him. His shoulders slumped. "You don't understand," he said after a long pause. "I just wanted her to respect me, to need me." My heart softened despite myself. "Respect isn't demanded," I said gently. "It's earned, and you can't buy it with money or manipulation." He didn't respond. The night stretched between us, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. "Finally," I added, "you had someone who loved you unconditionally. You could have built something real. But instead, you destroyed it because you were afraid of being seen as small." He looked up sharply, his eyes wet now, though he tried to hide it. "Do you know what it's like to grow up in that house?" he asked bitterly. "To be told every day that you're only as good as your last win? To know your mother loves the family name more than she loves you?" His pain was raw, unfiltered. For a moment, the anger I'd felt for him dulled into something sadder, pity, perhaps. "Yes," I said softly. "I do know what it's like to live with people who only care about control. I married one." That silenced him. He stared at me, his mouth tightening. "So what now?" he asked quietly. "You just walk away? Pretend none of this happened?" I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the evening pressing down. "No," I said. "I don't pretend, I heal, and you should too before there's nothing left of you to save." He looked down, his voice barely audible. "I don't know how." "You start by apologizing," I said simply. "Not for me, for yourself. For your mother, for Harper. And maybe someday, you'll understand what you destroyed." Dylan didn't answer. He just stared at the ground, shoulders shaking slightly, though I couldn't tell if it was anger or grief. I watched him for another moment, then turned to leave. As I walked away, he called out, his voice hoarse. "You think Harper will ever forgive me?" I stopped but didn't turn around. "That depends," I said quietly, "on whether you ever learn to forgive yourself." The air was still for a long moment. Then I heard the faint sound of him breaking down, the sound of a man realizing the full cost of his actions. I didn't turn back. I'd seen enough. As I reached my car, I looked up at the glowing windows of the venue. Through them, I could see Harper standing with Miranda, their silhouettes framed by soft light. For the first time that night, I felt peace. I opened the car door and took one last glance toward Dylan. He sat on the curb now, his face buried in his hands. A broken man left alone with his choices. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't even pity him. I just felt done. As I drove away, the road stretched out before me like a blank page, the kind that waits patiently for new beginnings. But the story didn't end there, it was only the beginning of our new life. The next few weeks were a blur of healing, lawyers, and unexpected peace. After everything that happened, life moved both too fast and too slow. The headlines came first. Tabloids and social media couldn't get enough of the wedding scandal of the year. Strangers online called me the bride's brave mother, though the word brave felt strange on my tongue. All I'd done was survive. The truth had come out in front of hundreds of people, and somehow, that had set me free. Harper moved back in with me 2 days after the wedding. She showed up at my door with 2 suitcases and red eyes from crying. I didn't ask any questions. I just opened my arms, and she collapsed into them, sobbing like the little girl I used to comfort after bad dreams. We stood there for a long time, saying nothing, until she whispered, "I'm so sorry, Mom." I stroked her hair, my own tears falling into it. "There's nothing to be sorry for," I said, softly. "You saw the truth, that's all that matters." The days that followed were quiet. We spent them unpacking, making tea, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. We cooked together again, just like we used to, simple meals, full of laughter and small silences that felt safe. Sometimes we cried. Sometimes we just sat together on the couch, holding hands, letting the stillness say what words couldn't. The annulment process started quickly, thanks to Miranda. True to her word, she covered all the legal expenses. Her lawyers were efficient, discreet, and kind. Within weeks, the marriage was officially erased, just a name on paper, gone. Harper cried when she received the final document. "It's like he never existed," she said, her voice breaking. "But he did," I told her gently. "And he taught you something, that love without respect isn't love at all." Miranda called frequently to check on us. Sometimes she'd stop by, bringing coffee or small gifts for Harper, always humble and sincere. We developed an unexpected friendship, one rooted not in status or guilt, but in shared understanding. I saw a different side of her, not the polished woman from society pages, but a mother trying to make amends. One afternoon, while sitting on my porch, she said quietly, "You know, I used to think women like you were naive too, forgiving, too emotional. But now I see it takes real strength to forgive when the world expects you to fight." I smiled faintly. "Sometimes forgiveness isn't for them," I said. "It's for us, so we can stop carrying their mistakes." Miranda nodded, her eyes glassy. "I hope I can learn that." The scandal had other effects too. My small charity, the one I'd started years ago for single mothers, suddenly gained attention. People reached out after reading about me online. Donations poured in, messages of support flooded my inbox. Women from across the country wrote to me, sharing their own stories of being humiliated, overlooked, or dismissed. "You reminded me that I'm not alone." One message read. I cried reading that. I never wanted fame, but knowing my pain helped someone else find courage that felt like purpose. Harper began volunteering with me not long after. She said she needed to channel her hurt into something good. Watching her comfort young mothers who came through our doors made me prouder than any wedding ever could. She was rebuilding herself, and I could see her strength growing with each passing day. We didn't talk about Dylan much. When his name came up in the news, and it did, often Harper would change the subject. and I never pressed. From what Miranda told me, he'd left town, trying to start over somewhere else. His businesses were collapsing, his reputation ruined. Part of me pitied him. But another part hoped he was finally confronting the emptiness he'd hidden behind his arrogance. One evening, as Harper and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees, she turned to me and said, "You know, I thought my life was over. But I think this was the beginning of something better." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "It usually is," I said. "Pain clears out what doesn't belong." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" she asked quietly. I thought about it for a moment. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But then I remember that if they hadn't, we wouldn't be here stronger, wiser, together." She smiled through her tears. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetheart," I whispered, kissing the top of her head. Weeks turned into months, and the ache in our hearts slowly began to fade. The charity thrived. Harper smiled more, and even I began to laugh again genuinely, freely. Miranda stayed in touch, visiting often. She'd started doing quiet charity work herself, donating anonymously to causes she once ignored. Guilt had changed her, but so had grace. Then, one afternoon, as I was sorting through donation receipts in my office, the phone rang. I answered, expecting Harper or one of the volunteers. But it was Miranda. Her voice was warm, calm. "Selena," she said, "I have something for you." I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "You've already given me more than enough, Miranda." She chuckled softly. "Not this. This isn't for you, it's for what you've built." I frowned slightly. Curious. "What do you mean?" She hesitated for a moment before replying. "Just come to the community center tomorrow at noon. Bring Harper, you'll see." There was something in her voice, a kind of quiet excitement I hadn't heard before. I agreed, though I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she was planning, it wasn't small. I hung up the phone, staring out the window as the late afternoon sun painted the room gold. Harper walked in, curious. "Who was that?" "Miranda," I said with a small smile. "She wants to see us tomorrow." Harper grinned. "Another surprise?" "Maybe," I said, my heart warming. "But for once, I think it's a good one." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about how far we'd come from humiliation to healing, from chaos to calm. Life had broken us open, but it had also made space for light to come through. Whatever awaited us tomorrow, I knew one thing for certain. We were ready. And then, one evening, Miranda called with surprising news. "Selena, I have something for you," Miranda said over the phone, her tone warm and calm. I didn't know then that her words would mark the beginning of one of the most beautiful days of my life. Harper and I arrived at the community center the next afternoon, curious and a little nervous. The sun was shining brightly, and the air smelled like spring, the kind of day that felt like renewal. As we approached the entrance, we noticed something unusual. The parking lot was full. People were streaming inside, dressed neatly, smiling as they passed us. "What's going on?" Harper asked, frowning slightly. I shrugged. "Maybe some kind of event?" Inside, the large hall was decorated with soft white flowers and gold ribbons. Tables lined the walls, covered in brochures, donation jars, and banners, each one printed with a familiar name. Harper's Haven, a support network for single mothers. I blinked, thinking I must have read it wrong. But then Miranda appeared from behind one of the displays, her elegant dress flowing as she walked toward us. "You named it after her," I whispered, my voice trembling. Miranda smiled, her eyes kind. "Not just after her," she said softly. "After both of you. After everything you've endured and everything you've built." Harper stood frozen, tears already filling her eyes. "What is this?" she asked. "It's a fundraiser," Miranda explained. "For your mother's charity. I wanted to help expand what she started housing. Childcare. Education programs. Real, tangible help for women who need it most." I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, overwhelmed by emotion. "Miranda, this is too much," I said shakily. I don't even know what to say. She reached out, taking my hands in hers. You don't have to say anything, she said gently. You already did every day you showed up, every woman you helped, every moment you kept going when it would have been easier to give up. This is just the world finally giving something back. People began to gather around us, volunteers, donors, community leaders. A small stage stood at the front of the room with a microphone. Miranda guided me and Harper toward it. There's someone who wants to thank you personally, she said. I hesitated, still dazed, as Miranda motioned toward the stage. As I stepped up, crowd erupted in applause. I wasn't used to that sound. It wasn't the polite kind you hear at formal events. It was warm, genuine, full of admiration. I looked out at the faces in front of me and saw mothers holding babies, young women standing together, families smiling. It hit me all at once. They were here because they believed in something I'd helped create. My eyes burned with tears. Miranda took the microphone first. Everyone, she began, thank you for coming. Today isn't about me, or even about the mistakes my family made. It's about resilience, about what happens when women refuse to be broken. She turned to look at me, her voice softening. This woman beside me is the embodiment of that strength. Selena didn't let life's cruelty harden her. She turned her pain into purpose, and because of her, hundreds of women will have a second chance. The audience applauded again. I covered my mouth, overwhelmed. Harper was crying beside me, smiling through her tears. Miranda handed me the microphone. Say something, she whispered. My hands shook as I took it. I'm not good at speeches, I began, my voice trembling. A few people chuckled softly. I took a deep breath. When I started helping single mothers, I wasn't trying to change the world. I was just trying to survive it. I knew what it felt like to be alone, to be scared, to wonder if you were enough. I wanted to make sure no woman ever felt that way again. My voice wavered, but I continued. And standing here today, seeing all of you, I realized that even the worst days can lead to something beautiful if you keep faith. I looked at Harper then, her cheeks glistening with tears. My daughter taught me what love really means, I said. It's not perfection, it's forgiveness. It's starting over, even when your heart is broken. Harper joined me on stage, wrapping her arms around me as the crowd cheered. I felt her tears on my shoulder and whispered, "We made it, sweetheart." When the applause faded, Miranda took the stage once more. She turned to the audience and announced, "To help launch Harper's Haven, I'll be donating $250,000 in Selena's name to ensure that no woman ever feels powerless again." The room erupted. People stood, clapping, some even crying. I stood there in shock, my heart pounding. "Miranda," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "You didn't have to." "Yes," she interrupted softly. "I did. Because of you, I finally understand what it means to give without expecting something in return." The moment felt surreal. All the pain, all the humiliation, all the sleepless nights they had led to this. A room full of hope, of second chances. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Later that night, after the event ended and the guests began to leave, I stood outside under the soft glow of the streetlights. The air was cool and still, the sky a deep indigo scattered with stars. Harper joined me, leaning against my shoulder. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said quietly. "It is," I whispered. "All of it. I think Grandma would have been proud." I nodded. "I think she is." Miranda walked up to us, her expression peaceful. "You've built something bigger than any of us imagined," she said. "Don't stop now." I looked at her, my heart full. "Thank you for everything." She smiled gently. "No, Selena, thank you. You reminded me what kind of woman I want to be." As she walked away, I turned to Harper, watching her laugh softly at something a volunteer said nearby. Her eyes sparkled with life, again strong, radiant, unbroken. And in that moment, I knew the past no longer held us. We had stepped into something new, something good. I looked up at the stars one last time, feeling my mother's pearls cool against my skin, and whispered, "We finally made it." because sometimes being thrown out isn't the end, it's the start of walking into something far better.